Well, good morning. Welcome to North Shore. I'm so glad to see those of you with us as we roll quickly into the Christmas season and Christmas week. I want to welcome those of you who are joining us online. So glad that you're with us as well. I just want to say a couple of words about Christmas Eve, which is tomorrow, so get ready. It has been quite a year for so many people, and I know as I talk as a pastor to many people, I find that more and more people are actually looking for a reason to have some hope. And maybe that's you or someone you know just looking for a reason, maybe in work or family or just in your circumstances of life, to have something you feel like you can cling to, that hang on to, that give you a reason to get up the next day and feel like your life's moving the right way. Well, Christmas Eve, we're going to be looking tomorrow at the reason that we can have hope. And I know it will be a blessing to you and to any friends or family that you bring with you. One quick request for those of you, especially if you call North Shore home, if you're able to attend at 6:30 tomorrow, we're expecting around 3,000 people to be on this campus tomorrow. A lot of our guests and visitors will come in earlier services, so if you're able to come at 6:30, that would be really amazing. You can actually make an eternal difference in somebody's life who has never heard the Christmas story or the story of Jesus just by attending at that last service. And by the way, because it's the last service, you can have all the hot chocolate you want. So, I mean, it will be like endless hot chocolate for you. But just be thinking about that as you're thinking about your time and schedule for tomorrow. So just jumping into this message, I recently saw a talk by a psychologist named Amy Cuddy. Some of you know her work. She gave a really well-known TED talk as well. And she studies how posture and body language can impact communication and social interaction between people. And she says that when people interact, and you may know this just from noticing how people interact, people tend to carry their bodies in one of two ways. We either tend to make ourselves bigger, or we tend to make ourselves smaller. Now, people make themselves bigger using certain kinds of body language. They'll hold their head up. Maybe their arms are to their side or outstretched. They kind of have a sense of raised shoulders broad. They're making themselves bigger with their body. And these postures express a sense of power and dominance. They're actually associated with the hormone testosterone. Some of you remember the track star Usain Bolt. He holds the track and field record for the 100 meter and the 200 meter. He's one of the most dominant athletes in human history. Here's a picture of Usain Bolt crossing a finish line in one of his races. Any guesses on who won the race? He's in a power pose, if you will. He's expressing through his posture, I'm a winner, I'm one, I'm the alpha dog, I'm the big deal. And here's the thing, this isn't something you have to teach people to do with their bodies. In fact, there's been studies on people who are blind from birth, but will still enter into this posture in a moment of victory or excitement. Their body just knows what to do to make itself bigger. Alternatively, Cuddy suggests that many of us will, in social interactions with other people, will tend to make ourselves smaller. We'll do that by kind of hunching our shoulders or crossing our arms or legs or kind of having a posture that expresses more weakness or inadequacy. One of Usain Bolt's greatest rivals was an American sprinter named Justin Gatlin. In almost every race that Bolt won, Gatlin didn't win. In fact, that happened until most of those races until Usain Bolt's final race in 2017, when Gatlin beat him by 0.02 of a second. Yet in honor of Bolt's dominance, Gatlin, the winner, entered into this posture. Let's see this picture. That was his deal. All right? Doesn't look like a posture of victory, does it? Bowed low, down on one knee, arms not high but low and down. Cuddy has a term for all of these different kind of body postures. She calls them power poses. I can see there's some different power poses in the room right now. Some of you have your head high and shoulders back. Some of you are more arms crossed or a little bit hunched over. I can tell some of you have entered what's called the power nap pose. And there you go. So you're just moving along. All this points to something really, really interesting about human nature, which is we tend in life to try to make ourselves bigger or make ourselves smaller. That is, your life can be all about you and your kingdom and your greatness and your glory, or it can be all about the greatness or glory of something else. And here's the thing, everybody chooses one of these two ways. You're either working to get bigger or you're letting yourself get smaller. And it's not hard, by the way, to guess the way the world would tell you to go. The wisdom in our day and life is simply, you have this one life, you have these moments, go out and try to make yourself bigger. Through wealth or prosperity or success, get more power, cut more corners. Make your name great. You got just one chance to do it. But at Christmas, the Christmas story, if you look closely, if you know the story, Christmas inverts the paradigm. At Christmas, God, who by definition is very, very, very big, makes himself very, very, very small. He became a tiny infant human baby wrapped in cloths and placed in a manger. Until this past week, I never really thought too much about Jesus being swaddled before. Ever think about this? In our day, we swaddle babies to help them sleep at night. You can make your own swaddle with a blanket, or you can buy a prefabricated swaddle with zippers and Velcro and twist ties and all that kind of stuff. And there's lots of options out there. There's the swaddle blanket, the miracle blanket, the sleep sack, the swaddle me. There's the love to dream swaddle, the Woomby swaddle. There's even one called the tortilla baby. True thing. All of them promise to help your new baby sleep soundly so you can sleep soundly. And as a relatively new parent, I can tell you, all lies. Just lies, all of it, okay? But in Jesus' day, swaddling was different. They would take pieces of cloth or linen and wrap up babies. They would be totally immobilized. They actually believed that would help their limbs grow straighter. So think about this picture. Here is the God of the universe totally immobilized in this tiny straitjacket. An infinite God, bound up, restricted, immobilized, limited in every possible way. God on Christmas did not choose to make himself bigger. He made himself smaller. So what does that mean for you and for me? As we think about Christmas and the Christmas story, what does this paradigm mean for our lives? That's what I want to talk about with you this morning. So if you have a Bible with you, you can turn to the Gospel of Matthew chapter 2. If you don't have a Bible, don't worry about it. You can find this on the North Shore app on your phone, or we'll have it on the screen behind me as well. Matthew chapter 2, starting in verse 1. Some of you will know the story well. Text says this: After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, just kind of flag that name. We'll come back to that part of the story. Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him." Now, the first question I have in a story like this is, who are these guys? Who are the Magi? And what are they doing? What's this story about? Well, the word magi comes from the Greek word magos, which is the word we get magic from. And that means these were ancient priests who sought wisdom and direction from the stars. They would use the constellations for guidance and wisdom and direction in life. Can you even imagine living in a day when people use astrological patterns for wisdom and advice in life? Can you even imagine that, right? Sometimes they're referred to as the three kings, or three wise men, though if you know the story, Matthew never tells us how many there actually are. The text says they're from the east, and scholars believe most likely they're from a part of the Arabian Peninsula based on the cargo they carried of frankincense and myrrh, these ancient spices and herbs. This cargo also indicates, because this was valuable cargo, that these were men of great means. They were, in their context, though they would be considered pagan idolaters to the Israelites, in their context, they were kind of leaders, alpha dogs, big shots in their day. They were the kind of people who would command honor and esteem and respect. They're the kind of people who had spent their lives making themselves bigger in some way or another, which is why what they do next in this story is so surprising. Look down at verse 10. Matthew writes, "When they saw the star, they were overjoyed, and on coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and they worshiped him." They didn't ask the people in the room, the commoners, the peasants that they would have seen around them. They didn't ask them to bow in their honor. They bowed down in Jesus' honor. They made themselves physically smaller before him. They worshiped. It's kind of a funny word. We don't often use that word perhaps in our day-to-day lives a lot, this word worship. For some of you, worship may have a connotation of singing spiritual songs. For some of you, worship is going to a church service or religious activity. For some of you, worship is just a time to escape the kind of everyday demands and pressures of your day. You come to church, you can drop off your kids for a whole hour. That's reason to worship, right? But worship at its core isn't about music or about going to a church. Worship is a kind of power pose. When we worship something or someone, we elevate it, we give it prominence, we devote ourselves to it. We get smaller so that what we worship can get bigger. And here's the thing. Regardless of your beliefs or background or what brought you into this room this morning, everybody worships, including you. You can worship money, you can worship beauty, you can worship power, you can worship reputation, you can worship the experience of pleasure. But when you wake up every morning, your day is going to be filled with all sorts of worship. So a writer named David Foster Wallace, who's not a person of faith or a follower of Jesus at all, but he once put it this way. He said, in the day-to-day trenches of adult life, there's actually no such thing as atheism. There's no such thing as not worshiping. Everybody worships. The only choice we get is what to worship. The Magi are on a journey to find something worthy of their worship, worthy of their devotion, worthy of elevating and making it bigger. They're on that journey, and here's the thing, so are you. Your life, your pursuits, your desires, you're on the same journey. In fact, their very presence in the story, if you think about it, their very presence in this story, these pagan astrologers from the East, their presence in this part of this story tells us their souls are not yet satisfied with what they've been pursuing. Maybe the wisdom in the stars hasn't been enough. Maybe the wealth they've accrued hasn't been enough. Maybe the just associating with people and power and the feeling that gave them wasn't enough. And we see this kind of dissatisfaction and incessant dissatisfaction in our day as well, don't we? Someone gets that promotion, but they're still not more content. Someone moves into that bigger home finally, but they still don't feel like it's enough. Or you finally meet that special someone, but then you still experience loneliness and insecurity, and you wonder why. You see, worship the wrong thing, and you'll never be satisfied. It's why, as people, we need to pay really close attention to disappointment in our lives. God will use disappointment to remind us of what we worship. Which is why when the Magi find Jesus, the text says they're overjoyed. The literal rendering of that phrase, they are rejoicing with great joy. It's like a great burden has been lifted. It's like a long quest for satisfaction has come and been completed. But notice, their quest did not end in a moment of making themselves larger or being great or being prominent. Which, by the way, is the kind of moment most of us are chasing in life, right? The joy came, the freedom came, the satisfaction came by surrendering, by worshiping, by making themselves smaller. Because you see, joy doesn't come when you make yourself bigger. Joy comes when you allow yourself to get smaller. Some of you know the name John the Baptist. His parents were Zechariah and Elizabeth. We heard part of their story last weekend. John grew up, as many of you know, to become a well-known prophet, kind of an eccentric guy, but a very well-known prophet. In fact, you may not know, he was such a prominent guy, so popular, he had a following that built up a reputation of having national fame. In fact, there's a Jewish historian named Josephus who lived in the first century who wrote that John gained so much influence that people, and I quote, seemed to be ready to do anything he advised. That was John's reputation. He was so influential, his followers were so loyal that the governing officials took notice and eventually they took his life. John, like many other prophets in his day, preached that what they called the Messiah was coming. Now, Messiah is just the Greek word or a Hebrew word for the anointed one or the chosen one. It refers to a person that God was going to bring up out of Israel to lead the people out of national oppression and into a restored nation. And that day, when prophets grew popular, when there was a leader or a prophet who grew very popular in people's eyes, and you can see how this would happen. This is just kind of human nature, right? When they got really popular, their message began to kind of drift away from the Messiah is coming to, guess what? I'm the Messiah. I mean, it's just kind of human nature. I have this great following. People are listening to me. I've got all this power. Maybe I'm the person. Maybe I'm the guy. Maybe it's about me. In fact, just so you know I'm not making this up, one example, there's a guy named Judas the Galilean. He led a revolutionary movement against Rome right about the time that Jesus was born. And as his movement and following grew, so did his ego and his sense of self and his sense of prominence. In fact, he grew to the point where he actually claimed to be the Messiah. He called himself the King of the Jews. Ever heard that title before? Why not, he thought. I've got this great following. I've got social and political momentum. I've got all this. I'm trending on Twitter. I mean, all this stuff's going right for me. So why am I telling you all this? Because John the Baptist was in the position to do the exact same. He was a big deal. Do you know to think about all the people following him, all the attention, all the accolades. In fact, he was at the height of his popularity and power right when Jesus came along, and Jesus began to put his own movement and following together, and it started growing. And in fact, John's own followers, I don't know if you know this, they came to John complaining about it. Listen to this. This is from the Gospel of John. It says, they came to John and said to him, Rabbi, that man who was with you on the other side of the Jordan, the one you testified about, look, he is baptizing and everybody's going to him. We're losing our market share. We're losing our business. We're losing our following. They're abandoning us. They're going to him. What's going to be left of our movement, John, if everybody goes to this guy? Are you going to allow this to keep happening? Are you going to let this movement grow? And so he told them, all this what we've been doing, guys, it's not about us. We've just been setting him up to do his thing, to become the Messiah and Savior he's meant to be. We're just the supporting role. We're like the best man here to make sure the groom gets ready. And then listen to what John says next. He says, that joy is mine and it's now complete. He must become greater. I must become less. It's a very interesting power pose, isn't it? And like the Magi, John is overjoyed. Finally, there's joy, there's relief, there's the sense of, aha, I can be satisfied. Because he's taken the right power pose. Jesus must become greater. I must become less. It's counterintuitive in our day. I know, but it always leads to joy. I have an old friend who's one of the most brilliant minds I know. She got her PhD and she was on her way to a prominent academic career. And then she had a child, this little girl who was born with some significant disabilities, and everything in her life and her family changed. That time and space to teach and speak and write and publish began to fade away. That time to go out and make a name for herself basically vanished. And she spent all of her life, all of her time, basically all of her hours with her little daughter. And with each passing week, month, year, those dreams of academic fame and fortune faded into the realm of simply what could have been. And she and I got a chance to catch up some time ago, and she said, Scotty, I have a much smaller life than I thought I would. And she paused for a moment, and just when I thought I should speak up and maybe console her for a moment, she said, but I have a much better life than I thought I would. See, I have this little girl, this precious gift, and God has blessed me more than I ever dreamed I could be blessed. And to think years ago, I would have traded these kind of things just for this, having my name in a journal. She had to change her worship. She had to change her power pose, letting yourself get smaller so that God can get bigger. And when you do, and people who take this road will tell you, when you do, a new kind of life and joy and generosity and freedom begins to flow out of you naturally. That's what we see from the Magi. Look at what they do next. It says they opened their treasures and presented Jesus with gifts of gold and frankincense and myrrh. I had never noticed this until this past week, but the story doesn't say that they came planning to bring all these gifts. The text doesn't say that they came to bring gifts or they were just going to drop off some goodies on their way by, so to speak. The text says they came to worship. They came to surrender. They came to get smaller. But when they did, this new kind of life and freedom begins to flow out of them. There's this outpouring of generosity. They don't feel the need to cling to what they have. You see, the life God calls us to live isn't supposed to be the sense of a burden or duty. It's what follows naturally when we get our worship right. And one of the signs in my life when spiritual life begins to feel burdensome or dutiful or heavy or weighty, it's not just a sign that I should try harder. It's a sign that I'm not worshiping right. I once heard it put this way: worship restores us to sanity because it puts us in touch with reality as reality actually is, that there is a God, and thank God it's not me. It's not me. But there's another character in this story. Another character in this story whom the Magi meet along the way, someone who takes a very different kind of power pose. One that's all about making himself bigger. Look back at Matthew chapter 2, verse 1. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod. This is a guy who has a time frame around him. Clearly somebody who is invested in his own brand during the time of King Herod. There's a few different Herods mentioned in the New Testament, if you know. This Herod is the first, and he's definitely the worst. He's a complicated guy. He was Arab by race. He was raised Jewish. He was culturally Greek, and he was politically loyal to the Romans. The Romans made him governor of Galilee when he was only 25 years old. A decade later, he was given control of Judea and Jerusalem. And during his rule, he was responsible for a number of great achievements, at least as the world would define it. He built cities and buildings and structures. He was responsible for the incredible expansion of the Jewish temple, which was massive and magnificent in scale. He was the Alpha in Israel. He was the big dog. He was the biggest of the big dogs. In fact, the Roman Senate actually gave him the title King of the Jews. Ever heard that before? So you can imagine when these wealthy travelers from the east came and asked, "Where is the newly born King of the Jews?" It would catch his attention, wouldn't it? Scripture says this: when King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. When he had called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them where the Messiah was to be born. "In Bethlehem in Judea," they replied, and they cited a prophecy from the Old Testament book of Micah. So Herod sent the Magi from Jerusalem to Bethlehem, saying this: "Go and search carefully for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me so that I too may go," and here's our word, "and worship him." Herod was planning to worship, of course. Just not Jesus. Not Jesus at all. Because Herod was known for only two things. Herod was known for making his own name great, making a name for himself, and getting rid of anybody who stood in his way. Some of you know that he tried to have Jesus killed by ordering the execution of all the baby boys born in Bethlehem in that day. But that wasn't even out of character for Herod. He executed his predecessors so he'd have no rivals. He taxed the people into homelessness so he could build great buildings to make a name for himself. When he rebuilt the temple, he placed a golden eagle, a symbol of Rome, on the temple as a way to remind the people who's really in charge. And when a group of Israelites snuck in and tore down that symbol, he had them rounded up and executed. Herod had at least 10 wives, and the only wife that he supposedly loved, he grew suspicious of, so he had her executed along with her mother and 2 of her sons. Not exactly husband of the year material, would you say? See, Herod had only one concern in life. Herod. And by the way, anyone know the nickname Herod took for himself? Herod the Great. That is, Herod, the guy who spent his life trying to make himself bigger. It's a little bit ironic, actually, if you think about it. Herod could have been the one to welcome Jesus. He was religiously Jewish. He built the temple. He knew that there were prophecies of a Messiah that was coming. The Magi didn't know any of that. They were astrologers from the East, but these outsiders fell on their knees and worshiped Jesus. The man who knew better would do no such thing. Question: anyone know what happened to Herod? He died. Historians believe he had chronic kidney failure. Another question: did his life end with joy and contentment? No. In fact, his sense of despair was so great at the end of his life, he tried to kill himself 5 days before he actually died. Another question: was he ever willing to let go of his power and privilege? No. After his failed suicide, one of his own sons tried to assume power on his behalf, and so he had his son killed just a few days before his own death. Another question: was there a great celebration of his life? No. He was so, in fact, he was so aware that no one would grieve his passing that he left instructions for prominent and well-loved Israelites in that day to be executed on the day of his death so that somebody would grieve. Not a very pretty picture, is it? But the scariest part of this story for me is that I share something in common with Herod. If I may be so bold, you may share something in common with Herod as well. My soul, your soul, like his soul, craves significance and satisfaction and security. I wake up desperate for it. I wake up each day needing it. And by the way, this desire is not a bad thing. It's how God made you. It's why you're constantly yearning after something. It's why once you get something that you've been hoping for or longing for or wanting in your life, like that promotion or the new car or the new house or that significant other, it feels good for a moment, but then you're still not satisfied. You're still yearning and craving and desiring. In fact, in the Bible, the Hebrew word for the human soul is the word nephesh. But it's also sometimes translated as the word mouth or stomach. Why? Because your soul is always hungry, your soul is always thirsty, your soul is always desiring. And the way your soul tries to satisfy itself, the way you go out today, you'll do this, the way you go try to satisfy the desires of your soul is by worship. You will put something in your life in prominence. You will elevate it. You will raise it up. You will place it in a place where you will get smaller and it will get bigger. Think about it. People worship reputation. Why? To satisfy that need for approval. People worship financial prosperity. Why? To satisfy that need for security. People worship power and influence. Why? To satisfy that need for significance. I want to be somebody. Only to discover in these forms of worship, they're still not satisfied. Am I getting into your life yet? And of course, we see this in our day, don't we? That great leader who achieves greatness in the workplace, but only to fall into alcoholism or infidelity. And you think to yourself, why? They had so much. Well, because success doesn't satisfy. That celebrity who gains all the fame and popularity and praise, only to fall into depression or suicide. Why? Because fame doesn't satisfy. You see, Herod's life, though extreme, is a picture of what can happen to any human soul when it misplaces its worship. Herod's life, though extreme, is a picture of what happens to countless people in our day who take the wrong power pose, who live to make themselves bigger, whether that's bigger in little ways or big ways, only to discover they're still empty, they're still isolated, they still lack joy. I mean, think about it. People don't set out to have a miserable life. Nobody does. But misery is the inevitable result of worshiping the wrong thing. So I want to ask you a question. And I want you, just in your own heart right now, just to be honest with yourself. I mean, no one else has to know. There's no condemning here around this. I just want to challenge you to be honest with yourself. Simple question. What do you worship? Not, what do you sing about on Sunday, or do you go to church on the weekends, or do you believe certain truths about God or the Bible? What do you worship? What do you elevate? What takes prominence in your life? What do you raise up? What do you get smaller before so that it can get bigger? Maybe it's your work. Maybe it's your portfolio. Maybe it's your status or reputation. Maybe it's how people see you. Maybe it's your identity as a parent. Maybe it's just the success of your kids. As a pastor, I'm tempted to worship success and feeling important every single day. I feel it in my soul. I told someone on staff this past week I needed to work on the pride that kind of takes hold of my heart when I feel like I give a good sermon. And they said, don't worry, I've heard you give lots of bad sermons. And I needed that feedback, you know. They're not on staff anymore, but I needed that feedback. I just needed to hear that. Question, it's a real simple one, folks. What do you worship? What do you get up every morning to make bigger? Hoping so desperately that your soul will feel satisfied. See, the Christmas story, as we've seen it this morning, is really a contrast of worship, isn't it? You're either going to bow to Jesus or you're going to stay on your throne. You're either going to let go of your ego and be willing to get smaller, or you're going to be driven by your ego, always wanting to get bigger. You're either going to worship the baby in the manger or you're going to want to try to find a way to get rid of him. You're either going to find joy like the Magi did, or end in despair like Herod did. And here's the thing. There's no middle ground in this story. There's no middle ground. There's no walking a fine line between the two. It's kind of interesting. Matthew starts the story calling Herod a king. 3 times, King Herod, the king. But when the Magi come and get on their knees and worship Jesus, after that, Matthew just calls him Herod. Because a new king has come. A new king has been crowned. See, friends, this story is not a gift exchange. This story is a coronation. There's a new king, one who's worthy of your worship because he didn't just come as a baby, he died on a cross. Think about that. It was the moment when all the alpha leaders, all the powerful people in his day thought they finally got rid of him. And that moment, I can tell you, Jesus' body bent and broken on a cross, it didn't look like a power pose. It looked like defeat. It looked like things were over. But it was when Jesus made himself really, really small, smaller than sin. A strange power got released through him, a power that was larger than life and bigger than death and stronger than sin, which is why in his kingdom this strange reality exists where the weak are made strong and the poor are made rich, and those who fall on their knees in desperate hope win. They win. Which is why the question you face this Christmas is not just, will you celebrate this baby in the manger? It's, will you bow to him? Will you bow to him? Will you bow to his definition of success, even if that means letting go of yours? Will you bow to his way of life, even if that means changing yours? Will you let go of that pride? That need to be seen in a certain way, that need to have your life all put together, that need to be bigger and better and more perfect this Christmas, and get a little smaller right now. Surrender right now so that you can find your life in his. Simple question. What will you choose? What are you going to choose this Christmas? Let me pray. Jesus, we come before you now, not to make ourselves bigger, although I, as much or more than anybody in this room, feel that temptation right now to be bigger or better, smarter or stronger, to pretend I've got my life totally put together. But the invitation right now from you, like it was 2,000 years ago, is to stop, to come to our senses, to restore sanity and just to worship, to get real low, to be willing to get smaller, to let go of our pride, to be willing to surrender. Hands open, all of our life before you right now. Our newly coronated King, the one who came to find us and save us, and love us, and restore us. God, I want to get real small before that. and find my soul's worth in you. May that be true for all of us this morning. And everybody said, amen.